It really means a lot. And it means a lot to be here with you tonight to talk about a bunch of new ideas that are in a just published book about power. And it's also great to be back in this part of the country. I spent 4 terrific years as a badger up in Madison. All right, and my wife Molly and I came down a lot to just to be in Chicago and Evanston and Northwestern, and what a wonderful place it is. So tonight I'm going to talk about power. And for those of you, as Lonnie said, are interested in the Greater Good Science Center, I've given you the website there. It's free. It's reaching about 1 million people each year. Really excellent stuff going on there, so please take advantage of it. The title of tonight of my talk is The Power Paradox Towards Stronger Human Hierarchies. When I was 10 years old, my parents did something really unusual, which is that my mom had just gotten her PhD at UCLA, and we were living in Laurel Canyon, which is kind of this trendy town in the hills. And my parents decided to move to a town in rural Northern California that was extremely poor, and where the kids that would become my friends were not going to go to college, whereas I was leaving a place that had a great educational context. And the schools were worse, the people were poorer, and it really changed my life to be there for a lot of different reasons, and I think you'll give you a flavor of that tonight. What really struck me about living in Penryn, this small town, this almost an Appalachian town in the foothills of the Sierras, was I lived on this little street called K.O. Drive, and I didn't really understand it at the time, but when I made that transition to that neighborhood, the kids were great, but they're having trouble in school. The parents were well-meaning, but the kids were getting into trouble, and some were ending up in prison or with drug problems. And what really struck me and really hit me like a light bulb when I started to dig into this science of power that you're going to learn about tonight is it helped me start to understand something that was happening in my neighborhood, which was that people were dying really young. There was a family, there were about 8 houses on my street. The first house, no floorboards, dad died in his 50s. You go across the street, second house, the guy never came outdoors. I learned in graduate school the name of that condition, which is agoraphobia, which is the paralyzing fear of getting outside. I never saw him. Shutters were always drawn. Popped down a couple of houses to my best friend's house, Memo Campos, Guillermo from Mexico, and his sister had leukemia early, and his dad died in his 60s. He blew his brains out when he had this cancer diagnosis. Dropped down a couple of houses from that. Was the Matthews family. A couple of families had moved from Oklahoma, and Jerry Matthews ran a very defunct lawnmower business, didn't make a dime, and his wife, Lorraine, all 350 pounds of her died when she was 45, right? As I took stock of it when I was a young guy, it just felt like life and crazy neighborhood and the like. And what the science tells us now is what was happening in that neighborhood was the enduring effects of powerlessness, which I'll end tonight on. And we're starting to get a very clear picture of how that kind of neighborhood really goes awry because of a psychological condition. So when I thought about that condition and headed into the science that I'm about to tell you, the psychological science was really silent with respect to thinking about what does power do to the psyche and our emotions and our mental lives. And I remember reading this quote by Bertrand Russell, the great philosopher, who was thinking about power as Nazism was rising in England and throughout Europe at that time. And he really nailed it. And I think this is going to capture kind of the broader mission of this talk, which is he said, the fundamental concept in social science is power, in the same sense as energy is in the fundamental concept in physics. The laws of social dynamics between parent and child, romantic partners, friends, work colleagues, people in community, really are laws which can only be stated or understood in terms of power. For Bertrand Russell, all of our lives are shaped by power dynamics. I didn't believe that heading into this science. I was raised kind of by hippie parents who wanted to get rid of power. And as I've done this science, I've realized how true and compelling that is. So what I want to do tonight And really, this is the narrative arc of the power paradox, is I'm going to move through scientific answers to 5 questions that really I think were unanswered with data and science prior to this very young science. First stop is, what is power, right? How can we think about what power is? We are in a radical moment historically in terms of what power dynamics are. I'll talk about that at the very end. I think we're moving out of 10,000 years of profound hierarchies to different models of social organization, and we'll see an answer to that. Second question, how do we get power, right? How do we influence people, change the world, lead to a good product at work, get our teenagers to be moral agents instead of little subversives that are ruining our lives, right? How do we have influence? And here we're going to see one of the biggest ideas in our culture is dead wrong, and that's the thinking of Niccolo Machiavelli, whom I'll talk about. And there really is a different model of power in the 21st century. Next up, classic question from Lord Acton, the great British historian. Does power corrupt us? Do you guys think it corrupts us? On that one, history and the old ancient wisdom is dead on. And regrettably, I'm going to show you a bunch of studies that show once we get a little bit of power, any human being, we tend to act like out-of-control sociopaths. And I just find that rather ironic and regrettable. Next question is, if that's the case, and this has been the case since humans were humans, how do we create social systems that really constrain the abuses of power and make for good power? And I'll have some surprising answers there. And then finally, we'll get back to the question that started my work in this area, which is really thinking about my neighbors on KO Drive in that very poor town, which is, why were they suffering so much physically? Why was it that when a kid jumped off our swing in 4 or 5 feet, his arm shattered in a bunch of places? We now know that's called human frailty condition that really strikes kids who are poor. And we'll see some really important data, part of it generated by scientists at Northwestern, about the really worrisome and serious effects of powerlessness. When I survey this data, and I'll give you a feel for it, I think that the health effects of powerlessness stack up with the major risk factors that the CDC is worried about, like smoking and drinking alcohol. I think they are on par in terms of compromising the health of our society as the things that we spend billions of dollars trying to get people to be mindful of. So that's where we're going. I've got about 40 minutes, and I really look forward to your questions and answers. If you're especially kind to me, today in another talk, I spontaneously did an absolute killer Donald Trump imitation. And it's got some science behind it, and you can ask me about that one. But away we go. Let's talk about power. So when I began this science as a psychologist and was thinking about, well, what is power, right? What is this magical medium in which all of social dynamics are really framed? And I consulted the literature, and like a lot of you, I would have intuitively thought that power was really the following, which is maybe it's capital or economic might, right? Or you could think about power in terms of military might and just raw force, right? Or you could think about power in political science as your access to the political process. Do you have influence? Can you vote? Can you sway elections? We're very concerned about that today, right? Those definitions of power as might and force bump into really serious conceptual problems. And a lot of people have written about this. The first comes out of the following thought experiment, which is take the average person in this room or your child or some friend of yours and ask the question, and imagine you have a sense of their nervous system, right? Who has more influence on that average American? Joe Biden, the vice president, or Taylor Swift, the pop star? Right? Once you really start to think about like what's shaping the person's psyche, how they approach the world, what they deem to be right or wrong, there is a serious case to be made that people who are cultural figures, Lady Gaga changing ideas about sexual identity as much as other kinds of powerful figures, has a very important influence in the world. When I asked a recent group I was teaching of Hong Kong government officials, who's more important to you? Joe Biden. They're like, who? Right. Taylor Swift. They're like, oh, Taylor Swift, you know. No, it was not even a contest. It gets more compelling, and this is the personal side to power that feminists have often written about. You know, this idea that power is force and might and economic capital and engagement in the political process doesn't help us make sense of the power that those voteless, penniless, 42-pound weaklings wield in our lives, namely our children, right, who have enormous influence in our lives. This is a photograph of my two beloved daughters when they still respected me. Back when they were 8 and 10, we were on this bike ride through Zion National Park. It's a spectacular ride. It's 8 miles of paradise where you're on a bike, and I was like, okay, this can be a little tricky. I'm a psychologist. I got this one worked out. I promised them like a handful of M&Ms every 500 pedals, right? And they're, here you go, here you go. Pretty soon they're covered in chocolate. I'm like, no more M&Ms. And those are the facial expressions that I encountered right there. Who do you think won that negotiation? Yeah, I was like, I was kidding. Here you go. Here are the keys to the car. Natalie, you're 10. You could probably drive it, you know. So that's a serious consideration, which is we have to think, you know, we have to personalize power and think about the dynamics of power in all relationships to really be fully sort of sensible in this. And so there's a lot of debate about this, and then I'll give you, there's a lot of actually deep thinking and then consensus. How we think about power now is really your ability to alter the state of other people, right? It's just, are you doing things that alter the emotions or thought patterns or nervous systems or health or economic conditions of another person? We've broadened the definition out, and in doing so, what we suddenly gain is insight into all these incredible acts of influence and power from people who don't begin with money or political access or the like. These are just some of my favorite examples I write about. Slavery, 300 or 400 years ago, slavery was the major economic system worldwide. 3/4 of the world was enslaved. And you could make a serious argument that slavery's demise began with a college student named Thomas Clarkson, who was starting to hear about the slave ships, and he wrote an essay for a contest, some written words. And then that won the contest. It got him into contact with the abolitionists in the 18th century in England. He started gathering information about the slave ships, and that was all that needed to happen, is knowledge about this social condition. And the politicians were much later to effect change, and he undid an entire structure to worldwide economy. Ella Baker, organizing in Mississippi, you can trace the civil rights movement way back to Ella Baker's community organizing in Mississippi. No one knows about her. She was bringing groups together, building consensus. Martin Luther King comes in later, and a lot of the movements that happened out of that can be traced back to Ella Baker. You could think about really interesting social innovations that just come out of the blue that change the world, right? Virginia Apgar invented the Apgar score. And before the Apgar score, doctors would kind of make these arbitrary calls sometimes about whether a child should receive a lot of care or not. Kids were dying, and historical analyses show Virginia Apgar, just this simple idea of like, let's measure kids' health with 4 or 5 indices, saved hundreds of thousands of lives just by this piece of information. We could go on. This is a serious realm of scholarship on the nature of power, but where I think it's more sensible to move to is that power is really how you alter the states of other people. It's continually fluctuating. It's based in little actions that you emit. It is the medium of our social lives. Second question, and I know you're thinking about this, is, I hope coming out of this, and I hope like the younger people here, you want to embrace power and you want to have more influence in the world. And in part, I think that's what's exciting about today's world in thinking about all the different kinds of change that are happening. For example, I do some consulting at Twitter. I'm part of their safety council. And there are counter-narrative groups in Pakistan where women are fighting against the rampant sexual violence in that culture, right? Through Twitter, through empowerment, through their self-organization. So how do we get power? Well, here's one answer, and it comes from this mischievous fellow, and his smile is even kind of mischievous if you look carefully at it. This is Niccolò Machiavelli, who wrote in the 16th century The Prince, which is one of the most influential books in human history. Wikipedia ranks it at about 30th in terms of overall worldwide influence. And here are some contemporary translations, and you guys know Niccolò Machiavelli. He was a Florentine politician. He was kicked out by the Medicis. He was tortured, and then he was living in isolation and kind of depressed, and he wanted to become part of the Florentine politics, and so he wrote The Prince to try to, as like, here's how you can get power and keep it. And here's a more recent Machiavellian type book of just some ideas about how you out there should get power in your daily lives. Law number 3, conceal your intentions, okay? Law number 6, court attention at all costs. Make sure everybody's thinking about you at all times, right? Law number 12, use selective honesty and generosity to disarm your team members or work colleagues or victims or whatever those people are. Heck, let's just get straight to it. Law number 15, crush your enemy totally, right? Keep others in suspended terror. When I started the science of power, people were like, oh, it's, this is the philosophy, that's how you get it, and this is, it's already been answered. And I don't want to bore, I've read every possible study of Machiavellianism, and all I will say is if you try to influence people with this strategy of social living, you don't rise in organizations, you become isolated and peripheral in the activity of the organization, you develop a very negative reputation, you yourself don't feel like you have power, you have trouble in your relationships, I could go on. It really doesn't work today, in large part because Machiavelli wrote in a much different historical context, right? Florence in the 16th century, I know you've been to Florence, you've drank the wine and you've looked at the art and there are the beautiful hills and you felt more peaceful and cooperative than at any moment in your life. But when Machiavelli wrote The Prince, it was the most violent place in human history. It was an incredibly different time. So how do we get power? Let me show you one thing that I just wrote about that Lonnie nicely forwarded around, I think. This is really, I mean, one of the most, as I look at the science of kindness and happiness in groups, and I'm putting together sort of some ideas about this, this is really, I think, and it just came to me when I was teaching human happiness at UC Berkeley, just thinking about amazing discoveries that people have made about how we actually gain power in social networks through kind of virtuous cycles of kindness and cooperation. So let me walk through this, and there are kind of individual sections on this that I talk about in the book, but it really, when I started to put the findings together, it really is stunning how contagious kindness and goodness is and how it's a platform for your opportunity to influence and have power. So this is a little sort of cycle of where your behaviors go, and here's how it works. If you're part of a neighborhood, or you're at work, or you're in your family, or you're on a sports team or religious group or what have you, what the data are starting to show, and I'll cite some key people, is that let's say at the top bubble, Maria expresses some gratitude to a coworker, Samir. Right? She just says, thanks a lot for your help on that. Okay? Just a nice expression of gratitude. What happens is, first off, and the reason I have a picture of the brain here, is we're now learning that acts that benefit others, gratitude, cooperation, sharing resources, collaborating, actually activate your own reward circuits in the brain. That's remarkable. When I'm engaging in selfless behaviors, that cost me, my brain is actually saying those are rewarding and delightful. The reward circuit of the brain is the what's called the ventral tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens, which send dopamine up into the prefrontal cortex, and it's associated with eating chocolate and the like. And here we're finding if Maria is being kind to Samir, she's already feeling rewarded for that act. It gets more interesting. That act, let's say she gives a resource or expresses gratitude, as Samir moves through the day, and this is work by James Fowler, though Samir is more cooperative with other people, right? Even though Maria is not even there. He carries that kindness with him and is 19% more cooperative. Gets more interesting. The people he's kind to now go on to another part of their day. Samir's gone, and those people are 7% more cooperative from Maria's original act of kindness, right? So what you're seeing is, and Mike Norton and others are working on this, wow, these initial acts of cooperation and gratitude and sharing spread through social networks virally, right? And affect organizations. Then what happens, and we've done a little bit of work on this, is that as those acts spread through a social network, people start talking coffee cooler conversations. They're talking about their leader, Maria, right? And they start constructing a positive reputation about her. She has this positive reputation that becomes a platform for her influence. And those people, they kind of don't even know it. They're uplifted by her pro-social tendencies. They will, when they're around Maria, our final loop here, will express respect for Maria and esteem and say, hey, this is a really good organization, or this is a nice neighborhood activity. And we now know from Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA, when I simply show esteem for you, it activates these safety networks in your brain that say, this is home. This is a good place. So simple acts of kindness, gratitude, sharing resources, cooperation, stimulate all this pro-social behavior, builds up your reputation, and becomes an incentive for more leadership and more influence. As Michel Foucault argued, really the great French philosopher, very complicated guy, power, your influence and how you change the world isn't inside of you. It's really operating through the social network, right? It starts to spread through. And the science now is really starting to show how the kinds of things you do over here in Chicago are going to be filtering and extending to other parts of the world. Your power is gained by advancing the greater good. All right, let me give you a couple of empirical examples, crazy studies that we've done at UC Berkeley. One of the ways that I've just been obsessed with, I was talking with Lonnie about this, is studies of touch. And and I talked about this in Born to Be Good. The simple pat on the back, an act of great leadership in any context, just a simple fist bump or just the expression of approval. Here's what we know it does neuroscientifically. We know, by the way, chimps spend about 15% of their waking hours grooming each other. Anybody know what that is? That little guy on the right? Slow Loris. Who said that? You're like I've asked 22,000 people that, and there are only 3 people who have ever known this, and they're sitting next to each other. It's the Slow Loris Club. It's a little sloth-like simian. It's in between a sloth and a primate, and it kind of moves really slowly. It evolved one finger that it uses just to groom other slow lorises. It's so important to their social lives. So what we know, when I get a nice pat on the back, right, from somebody who matters to me, and it penetrates the 8-pound wonder of your skin and the billions of cells that process information about that touch, that pat on the back or arm activates the reward circuit in my brain. I'm feeling good. That pat on the back actually makes other people more cooperative. If someone pats me on the back, I suddenly cooperate more with these people over here. It's starting to spread. It encourages people to engage in really sort of bold behavior. Teachers who pat their students on the back, this is a study in France, the kids are 3 to 5 times more likely to try hard problems on the board, right, compared to a control condition. It's encouraging. And then we know a ton of data showing the nice pat on the back is calming. So maybe this is a way, yeah?
My son said the NBA teams who do that to each other, they won more.
Now, Lonnie told me this was a smart crowd and would take away all my punchlines, and you just did that. But I love you. Okay, so, and that's exactly it. So, well, I've got one more piece. Well, I'll get to there. And that is one of our findings that's on this theme. Building that up, maybe touch is this way that we advance the greater good, make people perform better through expressions of important emotions that are important to power and effective leadership. This is this crazy study we did at UC Berkeley to show that just with simple touches to people, we can convey things like gratitude, which we already saw build strong teams. One person came to our laboratory. They stuck their arm through a barrier. Another person walks in. We give them a list of emotions, and we say, touch that arm and try to communicate these emotions. They're like, okay. Anger. What would you guys do? Yeah. Fuck. It's like, ow! You know, what would you do for sympathy or compassion? Nice. You guys are good. And then they go like that. Gratitude. A little tougher. They kind of do this like shake, like that. Really interesting. So I now get this touch on my arm. I can't even see the person. Like, what was that? And they guess. The blue bars show they are 7 times better than chance guessing in picking up gratitude, compassion, and love with half-second touches to the arm, right? That's incredible. Couple of gender differences. When women try to communicate anger to the male arm, he got nothing right. He had no idea what she was doing. I know. And when the man reached over and communicated compassion to the female arm, she was like, was that even a human being or a robot? I don't know what that was. So you can work on that on your own. I don't know what happened there. So what we're learning is touch, one of the most important sensory systems, is this language of social connection and has these contagious effects. Does it actually lead to better team performance and better leadership? So what we did, and my very astute member in the audience has already sort of blown my punchline, but I'll tell you anyway. Michael Krauss, who's now out at Yale, is a former student of mine. You know, we play, Michael and I played a lot of basketball together. You know, and I always marveled at how friendly basketball is, even though you're destroying each other's bodies, right? You know, I've played 3,000 games of basketball, and I've never seen a fight. That is more peaceful than the average family reunion in America. It's more peaceful than shopping for vegetables in Berkeley, California, where I saw 2 guys with ponytails, like, you know. So, you know, how does it happen? Through the miracle of touch. But here's what we did. We coded all the touch in one game of every team in the NBA. And it took us 17 hours per game. And this is what they do. About 1 minute and 48 seconds per game. High fives, fist bumps, arm embraces, bear hugs. Men, it's a discovery, like to do funny things when they say, I like you. They hit each other in the head. Arm embraces, chest bumps, flying hip bumps. And if everything is going amazingly well, you fly through the air and chest bump. I've tried it at my faculty meetings. It's not going that well. You know, and what we found, as you nicely anticipated, is that teams who touched more won more games at the end of the season and played better basketball. Players who touched more of their teams, we could chart how those behaviors, those reaching out, those pro-social behaviors, made their teams perform better over time, right? So you're getting this contagious effect of positive power on the NBA hardcourt. Another way of really sort of spreading goodwill through these cycles of virtue is to be empathetic. And we know an amazing study out of MIT. They studied teams solving hard problems, and the teams who did the best on these hard quantitative problems had team members who were really empathizing and vocalizing to their collaborators. They're like, oh, that's interesting. Woo, You know, they were sort of showing this collective interest that galvanized the intelligence of the teams, right? Any idea which gender was doing a little bit better job of that? The women were a little bit better. Well, it turns out this empathetic connection is essential to leadership. One of the striking things about reading the biography of Abraham Lincoln, you know, a great figure from Illinois, is he had the great speeches, he had phenomenal rhetoric, but what he was spectacular at was listening and empathizing. This is Thurlow Weed writing about Abraham Lincoln, kind of contemplating, like, how is it that this tall, poor, awkward guy beat the Republican establishment to win the election? How did he navigate the politics of getting rid of slavery? Not a simple thing. And what he said was, I love this part of it, he sees all who go there, hears all they have to say, talks freely with everybody, and reads what they have said. He was just a spectacularly gifted listener, right? And empathetic. So, going to give you guys just a couple little tips. One way that the studies show that we really, through these contagious cycles, encourage really great teamwork is just by using our voice. And we've done a lot of work on the human voice. This is the vocal apparatus, a spectacular system in your body. Air, your muscles around your lungs squeeze, particles of air go through your vocal cords, they start to vibrate. It produces these sort of sound waves that go through your mouth, and out come these incredible sounds that make for music and laughter and sarcasm and spoken word and so forth. We also communicate these amazing sounds that are really important for socially intelligent leadership, as I'll show you. Little sounds called vocal bursts, which are just subtle ways where you show, I'm listening to you, or I'm encouraging you, or what you say matters, and I respect it and dignify it. I'm going to give you a vocal burst just to test you guys. This is what I hear from my teenage daughters a lot. See if you know what emotion I am communicating. It's like, I mean, even when I just hear that, I'm like, my hair doesn't look like it did when I was in high school, you know, whatever it is. It's contempt and disdain. Okay, now I'm going to test you guys. I'm going to count to 3. Here's a great, this is a great tool of great leadership, is to convey interest in other people. I'm going to count to 3. Give me your best interest sound. 1, 2, 3. Man, I feel like you guys are interested. That's amazing. Okay, even better, imagine a colleague of your teenage kid, your partner is stressed out, and you want to have emotionally intelligent, socially intelligent leadership by just showing sympathy. Count to 3 what the sound of sympathy is. 1, 2, 3. Very nice. I knew I was warned this was a sharp group. Really amazing. So we know just that kind of engagement, a lot of studies are showing, is so vital to, you know, really good power and positive leadership. Just a little side note, I've done some really fun work at Facebook, redesigning some of their emoticons that led to their reactions, and it has a very important lesson about the state of empathy in the United States I'm about to get to. They asked me to create some emotional stickers for their site, like little emoticons that you send to your friends. So I talked to a friend who is an illustrator at Pixar. He drew a bunch of emotions for me. Aren't these amazing? And I will send these to you for free if you like. Isn't that admiration just incredible? Like, wow, there's a Dalai Lama, right? You know, or that koi expression. Teenagers often show that. And then, who could forget this one from your 4-year-old? The disagree face, right? So, nope, I'm not doing that. This led to us to redesign these great emotional emoticons for Facebook. They're called Finch in honor of Charles Darwin. You can get them there. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of these have been sent. And there they are, you can see them. You know, there's the disgust, there's the coy, there's the awe expression. Just a wonderful, rich array of these that led to the reactions. We then gathered some big data that allowed us to map the empathetic, sympathetic quality of different countries. This is hundreds of millions of data points. And so what I'm showing you, the redder the country, the more sympathy that they express and share with each other. And I'm drawing your attention to the Canada-US comparison. And that's all you need to know. Then you can look at anger, and there we are, not doing too well. There are those feisty Australians fighting all the time. So a lot of fun of that. But what we know, contrast to Machiavelli, is that good power is found in a lot of these deeply evolved pro-social tendencies, from gratitude to sharing resources to empathy to storytelling. This astonished me. This is a review of who gains power, females and males, in hunter-gatherer societies. Hunter-gatherer societies on different continents live for 200,000 years in the social conditions in which we evolved, right? These are the kind of the primordial tendencies that you should be observing in who we are as a species. And this is a summary of 48 studies saying the leader in these hunter-gatherer societies is generous, brave, wise in making military decisions, apt at resolving conflicts, fair, impartial, reliable, tactful, and strong, assertive, and humble. Sounds like American politics, I'm sure, right? So, but it shows us that it's not just 21st century, it's a very deep tendency to find that the pro-social is a basis of enduring power. Third question. This one you already know the answer to, probably, but I'll try to persuade you yet again. Does power corrupt? Does it unleash our problematic tendencies? The answer, regrettably, is it does to all of us in really striking ways. You know, what studies are finding, I'll just give you a couple of highlights from our lab, is, you know, if you give people a little bit of power and experiment, you say, you know, you're in charge and we're paying you more to do this study than those two people over there, right? And I'm like, well, I knew that. I'm kind of a natural leader. If I have a little dose of power, I'm more likely to touch people inappropriately, swear, lie, cheat, steal, shoplift, have sexual affairs. I mean, most of the unethical tendencies come out of feeling too much power. Really striking. You don't have to go too far in thinking about human history where you see examples of this. Here are a couple of experiments that we did in our lab. One has now come to be known as the Cookie Monster study. 5 people at Wisconsin, this is at Wisconsin, 3 people at the University of Wisconsin came to the lab. We pointed to one of them and we said, you're in charge. And they're like, thank you. And they were the powerful and they felt more powerful. And then we had them do a really boring task, write policies for the university for an hour. Now, mandatory testing, they're gathering facts and they're writing away. Halfway into the study, we bring a plate of 5 delicious chocolate chip cookies, right? Right on the table in this small lab room. Everybody grabs a cookie, starts eating, right? Our question was, because all groups leave that last cookie on the plate, our question was, who takes that 4th cookie? And indeed, as you see in the bar graph, it's the high power person reaching over like, that's mine, buddy. It gets worse. My grad student coded how they ate. Took us a few months. The high power person, randomly assigned, was more likely to be eating with their mouth open, lips smacking, and crumbs falling all over their sweaters. Like, right? Impulsive behavior. My grad student, Paul Piff, now a professor, did a study where we looked at, we actually coded in California, there are pedestrian zones where you're supposed to stop for pedestrians. And so we positioned this poor Berkeley undergrad at the edge of a pedestrian zone. And they're like, first we thought, like, let's really do this wild. Like, let's get a woman with a baby carriage and a little baby, like, trying to, but couldn't do that. That was unethical. So this undergrad is, like, at the edge of the pedestrian zone, looking like, I want to go across. It's the law. And then we code, we have a power scale of how powerful is your car, right? Are you driving this Dodge Colt? That's a 1. A Ford Taurus. There's the Civic. I think that's an Accord, and a Mercedes is the most powerful car. And what we find, rather regrettably, is this right here, which is that if you drive a poor car, They always stop for the pedestrian, right? I'm with you, man. Yeah. They don't have very good brakes, but they stop that car. Okay? But look at that. If you're driving that fancy car, 46% of the time, they blaze on through, right? So impulsive, inappropriate. And, we had people, this one got got us into trouble. And we got emails like, this was my favorite, and I apologize if you're a Prius driver, but this is science. Everybody's pointing like, you are. We got these emails like, yeah, I know, I heard about your study, but I drive a Prius, and I'm a moral exemplar, right? So we analyzed the data. The Prius drivers were the worst, right? And that's because they're like, well, I'm saving the environment, so I'll barrel through this thing right now, so whatever it is. So that got us into trouble. So anyway, so not only impulsive behavior, power corrupts, but it also does something really worrisome, which it really diminishes your empathy, right? And we have dozens of studies showing if I'm just feeling powerful, if I'm in charge of things, I just don't listen as carefully. I don't know what people are feeling as well. Regrettably, those tendencies then lead to finding powerful people are more likely to stereotype other people, which is problematic. A powerful boss is more likely to stereotype a woman, a female employee. This is one of the first studies that demonstrated this empathy deficit. Adam Galinsky and his colleagues assigned people to power. All you have to do is draw an E on your forehead so the person across from you can read it really easily. So what do? You reverse it, right? You don't draw it like you would see it. You have to think how they would see it, and you reverse your orientation. Low power people, no trouble. They do it right away. Okay, yeah, no, I can see what you're thinking, and they reverse orientation. High power people on the right, 40% of them absolutely could not do the task. They're like, oh, sorry, I drew it from my perspective again. Let me try one more time. Oh, I did it again, And when you think about how important perspective taking is to good, strong groups, and power is diminishing that ability, it's not a good sign. So lots of data on that. And that really is the power paradox of groups really want socially intelligent leaders. We gain power through what is good in human nature, but regrettably power decreases our social intelligence and really releases very often what is problematic in human behavior. And a ton of data on those ideas in the power paradox. Two final ideas, and then we'll open it up. And I have about 10 more minutes of stuff. I was talking to Lonnie earlier about this, and in a way, this is one of the more counterintuitive things about human power, but one of the more deeper properties of how we get things done in the world and how we change the world. Intuitively, you think that power is something you go grab, right? But in fact, power is given to you. It is given to you by the people around you. And your power and your influence and your chance to make a difference are only as good as what those people think of you, right? It is just a foundational property of social groups is they're continually giving people power, and that is really how much you'll make a difference in the world. If my lab, the 15 people in my lab don't respect me or don't like me, our lab becomes less productive, right? It becomes more problematic. And the way that we give people power is through some really interesting things like public scrutiny. A lot of studies are showing that having critics on hand is a good way to keep our power in check, to reward people for the right kind of things or status. And through a really interesting social process called your reputation, that your reputation is really the platform of the difference you'll make in the world, what other people think of you, right? We are a reputation-mad species. It is everywhere in human interactions. There's, of course, the great novel, Nathaniel Hawthorne, that really is about the perils of reputation, of the Scarlet Letter, how Hester Prynne's reputation was really ruined inappropriately for things that happened in that very early society. Thankfully, we've evolved in how we kind of track people's reputations and comment on their problematic, impulsive, abusive behaviors. In the 18th century, in Germany, if you abused your power, you got to wear a shame mask and walk around the village for a couple of weeks, right? This is a shame mask if you acted like a pig in your local town, right? You were sort of eating too much or so forth. You'd have to wear that thing around for a couple of weeks of people like, there he is, look at Dacher, you know. So we've moved beyond that, I think, or maybe not. And one of the things we've really been interested in is the power of social networks to spread information about people's reputations as really foundational to your influence in the world. What we know is within a week when college students go to college, everybody knows what their reputation is, right? Are you collaborative? Are you kind of undermining things? So it spreads really fast. We know in organizations, this is Bert at the University of Chicago, if I have a good reputation in an organization, I get more resources directed my way. I get more opportunities for innovation, right? People want to collaborate. I'm in the hotspots of the organization. We know just being aware of your reputation is a way to keep a check on the abuses of power. And it's one reason why groups are so invested in determining the reputation of people. Take a look at these three dots. What do they remind you of? Yeah. Triangle? What else does it seem to remind you of? A human face, right? There are studies that show it. And when we are aware of a human face kind of looking at us, we start to think about our reputation and we become much more considerate and kind and pro-social. There are studies that show, you know, all you have to do, like a person comes into the lab and these three dots are on the wall, right? And you're sort of looking at these dots, you become much more generous and sharing just with these three dots on the wall because it reminds you of your reputation and the fact that other people have an eye on you. So important to strong social systems is the ability to spread information about their reputation. You know, I'm thinking like presidential debates coming up, have the three dots behind our two candidates, maybe they'll be a little bit more civil. Very powerful. All right, let me move to our final point because of just to stay on time, and I'm really curious to what you have to say. Strong social systems that really keep power in balance and spread it around have a lot of commentary and critique and opportunities to form ideas about the reputation of leaders, right? The first thing that Hitler and Stalin did when they rose to power is they destroyed all of the systems of critical commentary where ordinary citizens could comment on their reputations, right? They controlled the press, arts, and the like. So it's foundational to strong societies. So let's end where I began, and then I have a couple of kind of moving forward ideas. So this jolted me when I started to hear about this science and become part of it. So this diagram right over here is the stress system in your body. It's called the HPA axis. It's the biological system. Hypothalamus, pituitary, goes down to your adrenal glands. And then the adrenal glands, as you probably know, shoot cortisol into your bloodstream, and it revs up your body. And we've all felt cortisol in our body. You know, if you're stressed out late at night and you can't sleep and your body's agitated, your muscles are tense, your heart is pounding, there's constriction in your veins, right? That's the stress response that is really for fighting off serious predators and dealing with very imminent threat, right? Now, we also started to learn in this science of stress that when that system is on overdrive, and I want to bring in one other important member of this system, and I'm hoping this, which is not only is cortisol involved in your stress response, but this is part of your inflammation response called the cytokine response. These are little proteins that go to toxins in your body and kill the toxin, and it swells up your body as if you have a flu, right? It's a very adaptive response if you're dealing with a flu virus or toxins in your body or a cut on your skin and your skin swells up. That's the inflammation response. It's also part of how we handle stress and threat. We knew from a lot of important data that if this system is hyperactivated, it's bad news for your life expectancy, right? Your stomach lining starts deteriorating, cells in your brain are compromised. Alyssa Epple at UC San Francisco, 2004, famous finding, the telomeres on your DNA start to shorten. It's little tissue on your DNA. They start to shorten when you're really stressed out. They age by 10 years as a function of stress. Your cells start dying. We knew that. And then there's this really amazing paper by Sally Dickerson who said, well, you know, we humans are social. We are a very collaborative, collective species. Stress today isn't about taking care of the saber-toothed tiger. What drives this system into overdrive? And it turned out her main discovery, 200 studies, was feeling powerless, feeling disrespected, feeling like you're on the outside of the social collective, right? Now, here are some other studies. Rudy Mendoza-Denton in my department. If I am stigmatized because of my race, this system goes into overdrive. Rudy Mendoza-Denton, if I feel like I'm from a lower class background in a college, and that is stigmatized, this system goes into overdrive. Wendy Mendez, if I am a woman and I hear data about how women are falling in power or are not as capable, this system goes into overdrive because you're disempowered. There are even studies as simple as a former student in my lab, Keely Muscatel, if I hear statements from other people who are part of my group who are kind of disrespecting me, or, oh, you know, Dacher isn't as talented as he thinks he is, or, boy, he isn't a great dancer, or whatever it is. If I just hear these statements out there, this system kicks into gear and goes into overdrive, right? So what's striking is our fight or flight system is now really about powerlessness. And these are some of the causes of that. And the story becomes even more complex, and I'm going to move quickly here, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Nancy Adler, major discovery, 1994, replicated hundreds of times. She just asked people, where are you on a 10-rung ladder in the United States in terms of your status? Okay, I'm a 7. Well, my friend, the 8, has a better immune system, lives longer, better cardiovascular system, on down the line. Just a 1-rung ladder difference, same medical care, but having lower status costs you in terms of your life expectancy. Greg Miller and Edith Chen at Northwestern are finding by the time a kid is 5, raised in poverty, these two systems are on overdrive all the time. They don't know how to handle the environment, and they're losing 5 to 10 years of life expectancy just by disempowerment. So very serious stuff to be thinking about. I want to end with this data, and I'm happy to talk to you about this, but when you take a look at what powerlessness does to our society, these are all the well-documented correlates of it. Depression is about powerlessness. Anxiety disorders, poor health, and the like. I have been really interested in lots of cheap solutions to this. As Lonnie mentioned, one of the things that we do is at the Greater Good Science Center with the Sierra Club is we take kids outdoors who have never been outdoors that are growing up in Oakland, and we're showing drops in the inflammation response in cortisol, and they're getting along better with their parents and school with just one trip out. We're doing this with veterans as well. So a lot of stuff to do. So what's really exciting, and this, it's such a stunning, deep step back to where we are right now. These are 2 archaeologists up at the University of Michigan, Flannery and Marcus. And as you may know, we were largely a collaborative egalitarian culture prior to agriculture, 12 to 15,000 years ago. And that's pretty clear, and a lot of the data suggests we really like near equality between people. And then with agriculture and settlements, hierarchies became really extreme. And the data are really stunning. 12,000 years ago, as we settled into these more complicated social systems, you see the emergence of inequality, slavery, polygamy, and men owning women, and poor health, right? A lot of the problems of hierarchical power. But what I think, which is really perhaps fruit for our discussion, is right now, there are a lot of really interesting things that are happening in terms of women rising in power, more horizontal organizations to groups, more rights. A lot of interesting, the consensus now is we are seeing a rise in democracies around the world, very interesting forms of power on Instagram, for example. And what I hope, it's funny, I teach a lot on happiness, and I always, it's this fundamental question, like, when your family is up against the wall, your kids are struggling, you always say this sort of sentence in your head, like, all I really care about is my mom is happy who's sick, or my kid is happy. And now, I also want to make sure they feel powerful, because that is really also this pathway to the meaningful life. And I hope that you guys make the